Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It's certainly my pleasure to be able to introduce you to the Flowgear platform today. Looks like we've got a great turnout, so looking forward to some good questions later on. As we go in, let me just begin by reviewing our agenda for the day. We're going to start by talking about what Flowgear actually solves as a platform, what problem it deals with. We'll talk about some of the benefits of the platform, the different ways that it can be applied. I'm going to jump into a demo where I'm going to go in a little bit of detail around some of those different types of use cases, and then we're going to close out by talking about the partner program. And with that in mind, a big thanks to the sponsors that you see on screen over here. These are the folks who have made this event possible, so a huge thank you to them. There's been a great turnout today. I will reference them a little bit later on. So with that, let me begin by providing a little bit of context as to where we come from. You know, if you think of the 90s and even the early 2000s, when we needed to integrate systems, there weren't many systems to integrate. We had one application that did everything in our business. It was usually this monolith. And if we needed to, we could easily forklift data across different areas of that system or within the business because we could talk to the database directly and we could move files around and that kind of thing. But with the advent and popularity of cloud, what's happened is we've generally moved away from the kind of ERP monolith, and we're using a very large number of diverse cloud services in many cases. So these are very specialized, focused tool sets, and because they're focused, there's a lot more of them, and because they're cloud, they're outside of the expertise or outside of the area of control of our organization. And so what that means is that instead of having one place where all our data lives, now we've got 50 places where that data lives. And so the requirement for integration is far more profound than it's ever been before. And that's what Flowgear enables you to deal with. It allows you to provide a way to integrate across all of the apps and services in your organization, regardless of what the blend of on-premise versus cloud looks like there, and also importantly allows you to connect with third parties so that you can enhance things like customer experience by providing B2C integrations, or perhaps integrate with your other partners or your upstream vendors as well. Now, before we get into the details of the platform, no solution like this is going to make sense unless it provides some kind of business benefit. And this is really what Flowgear is going to deliver. All of the features and components that I'm going to share with you today really come down to driving these four things. First of all, if you can automate processes, you can reduce overhead. So your staff move from having to rekey data manually across different systems. That reduces the delay to get data moved from one system to another. So for example, if you have orders coming in and you need to get those into your accounting system so that they can be processed as invoices, or perhaps they need to get into picking. If you can automate that process, you're reducing the amount of time. You're also eliminating the margin of error that's associated with people having to do that process manually. And what happens to the staff who were previously doing these mundane tasks is that they're now able to move on to higher value, more productive tasks. We've got some great examples of this with our customers. One of them had a call center. Every week they just call the same customers again and request reorder information. They were just placing those same orders over and over again. Once we'd automated the order process, those same call center people could now engage in deeper conversations and move into more of an account management role with that same set of customers, enhancing the relationship with those customers. If you're able to connect across multiple systems, you're by definition getting rid of that natural siloing effect. So anyone working in one of the applications that your business runs on now has much better visibility of all of the data. Take, for example, a customer record. If you're in CRM, if you can integrate things like the customer transactional history and maybe the credit balance and credit score out of ERP into CRM, now when someone is in CRM and about to give a customer a follow-up call, they actually have additional information available to them. And then finally, you can create integration as a competitive advantage. If you can offer integration that your competitors can't, either with your customers or even upstream to your suppliers, that's a huge competitive advantage. Flowgear allows you to go beyond just publishing an API. Publishing an API for your consumers your customers to consume is very helpful, but you need to be able to give them that last mile integration. If you can give them an end-to-end deep integration all the way from your systems into theirs without them having to engage in a software development project, that's enormously valuable. Now, to make it real, let me look at some of the examples that Flowgear typically gets applied to. I'll just pick off a couple of these. One, I'm going to show you just a little bit of a teaser of this later on, but a common use case actually is if you have a mobile application that you want to make available, maybe certain features for your customers, You can use Flowgear as the data layer that allows you to integrate with the internal systems. So the folks who are building the mobile app don't have to worry about how they're going to figure out how to read and write that data, or how you don't have to worry how you're going to control access to that. They can just call into Flowgear. And I'll give you a little bit of a teaser of how that's going to work in a second. If you want to enhance customer experience, you can do things like automating transmission of tracking information. If your customers have placed an order, you can keep them updated over whatever communicational channel they're interested in, whether that's email or SMS, and more recently we've actually just added support for WhatsApp for Business as well, directly through the Flowgear platform. If you're running multiple branches in multiple disparate geographies and you have independent accounting systems in each of those branches, a common requirement is to be able to roll up that financial data at head office level. But it doesn't even just have to be for finance purposes. What if you just wanted to get a consolidated stock valuation or some other piece of data that gets aggregated together from all of those branches? And then finally, if you're running an e-commerce store, it's very common to have an order placed in the store that needs to get integrated into your accounting system so that that order can then be processed. So these are all of the examples that are typically solved by our platform. One of the common things that come up very early in our conversations with our prospective customers is, do I really need to move from a hand-coded solution? So hand coding is what would have happened by default if you didn't make a strategic decision to invest in a platform. Now, and hand coding works to begin with, absolutely. So if you need to connect 2 or 3 things together, maybe you've had some hand-coded integrations that are achieving that for you. The problem with hand coding is as it grows and over time. So as it grows, as there are more and more touch points that you need to integrate, there are all of these disparate bits of code, they're running in different ways, they authenticate in different ways, they're running in different locations. It's very difficult to keep centralized control over that. Over time, you might want to change those integrations. Let's say you're building an order integration, and a year later you need to integrate some new fields, but the developer who was responsible for that is no longer with the company that you outsource to, so someone else comes in, they don't quite know where to pick up, and the level of code quality, let's face it, on custom designed solutions is never going to be the same as a product that is being built to be sold as a product. So necessarily the code quality level is much lower. If you move over to a platform, you avoid all of those problems. There's no maintenance overhead. In Flowgear, all of the connectors that we have available are maintained for you. So if you have a new version of your CRM or your ERP, our connectors are going to be kept up to date for you. And that means that it's safe to run those business critical processes in a way where they can actually be, the integrations themselves can be backed by a service level agreement. Also, in a hand code solution, what is actually getting built is a bunch of code. If you don't have a development background, it makes it very difficult to understand what that code is doing. What I'm going to show you today is the visual design of our platform. We typically refer to ourselves as low code, but in most cases, the solutions that we build are actually no code. And what that means is, if you're a department head who doesn't have a development background, you can go into the platform and you can actually inspect the workflows, inspect the integrations that have been built, and you can make decisions about what you want to change. You might not want to make those changes yourself, perhaps you're working with one of our partners, but at least you can give that partner a very technically accurate briefing, and that reduces the overhead and the implementation cost when you're able to do that. Now, the category that we come from is known as iPaaS. It's a bit of a mouthful. This is a Gartner term that stands for Integration Platform as a Service. And this is a category that emerged in the early 2010s, and it's really an reimagining rather, of the Enterprise Service Bus, which is a suite of tools that came out circa early 90s. And what iPaaS does is seeks to provide a robust, centralized platform that allows you to integrate across all of the systems in your business, but it's offered as a cloud service. And so usually from a commercial point of view, that's done on a monthly subscription basis. And because it's not traditional software, the subscriptions can usually be quite accurately sized based on the level of consumption. I've got some things to share with you around the unique commercial model that we actually run inside Flowgear. So iPaaS is going to be really good at connecting into structured data sources, databases, file systems, different types of APIs, and you can build visual processes around that. But a few years back, there was a new kid on the block, this term being thrown around called RPA, or Robotic Process Automation. And where platforms like iPaaS platforms seek to connect with the back end of systems like APIs and databases, what RPA does is connect through the front end instead. Now, this is very empowering because it means that an end user can build their own automation process even if they don't understand the APIs and the databases that that system uses. So let's say they wanted to automate a customer take on in SAP. They would fire up SAP, they'd fire up their RPA tool of choice and set it to start recording. It would start to record all of the fields that they're capturing and the business logic around how that gets done. And then those actions can be replayed to automate tedious tasks. Now, RPA certainly has its strengths. It's very empowering for end users. It's very easy to work with, and it allows you to integrate into systems that don't have APIs or databases. But it is prone to brittleness. For example, if you install an update to your SAP implementation, some of the screens might change, that RPA toolset perhaps can't work any longer. Whereas if you had gone with APIs, those are generally going to be more robust. Now, we don't actually think that the answer is one or the other. We think that these two can operate together in concert. And that's where we're going with the Flowgear platform in 2020. So you're going to see some new RPA capabilities come out, and they're going to be blended very seamlessly into the core of the iPaaS platform. And what this gives you is a rock-solid platform for creating these sort of really strategic business-critical integrations. But you can complement that with RPA scenarios where you want to do some quick R&D, you want to just get something out the door to figure out whether it's going to be feasible, or where those systems that you want to integrate with don't have an API, and so you have no other choice but to connect in that way. So here's a quick summary of the feature overview. I'll just pick off a couple of these. We're going to go into a little bit more detail later on. The premise is that we want to reduce the amount of time taken to integrate. And you can do that by building a visual integration platform. So you're creating things visually, a little bit like a Visio diagram. You can also do that by having connectors that are pre-built. So you don't need to worry about how to integrate with, product X's API. We've done that work for you. It also logs all of the interactions for you. So if anything goes wrong, you can troubleshoot it very easily. At the same time, we're coupling that with a commercial model that's very unique. So whereas most platforms in our space are going to charge you a fixed license fee and then they're going to charge you for additional connectors, we don't do that. We actually allow you to control which workflows are active at a point in time, and every plan gives you a certain number of workflows that are allowed to be active at a particular point in time. So let me share with you where we fit into the space. We call this the Continuum. We don't see ourselves as a platform for everyone, and I just want to carve out exactly where we do fit. So on the far left over here, you've got the citizen integrator tools as they're commonly known. I'm thinking of things like Zapier and IFT. These are really great tool sets for getting up and running very quickly. They're very plug and play. There's very little technical expertise required. So it's very quick to get up and running. But you usually hit the technical limitations of what these things are capable of quite quickly. And if you want very high frequency syncs, or if you need very high volumes, they actually can become expensive very quickly as well. Then on the far other end, you've got the traditional ESB, and this is mostly going to be in the enterprise space. Properly used, ESB is going to be for scenarios where you have millions to tens of millions of transactions a day. Every millisecond counts, so the deployment has to be as close to your network as possible. And you want to run your own deployment. You're going to provision those servers, you're going to put everything together. Mostly in enterprise space where those kinds of volumes are required. Most iPaaS platforms, with the exception of Flowgear and a very select few others, have also gone after the enterprise space. Many of them because they've actually spun up an iPaaS platform out of their traditional ESB, but their whole organization is geared towards selling into the enterprise space. Flowgear deliberately doesn't do that. So we address that mid-market of a 50-person business and up into enterprise. That's the sweet spot where it plays well. We have very competitive pricing, and we have feature parity with respect to a lot of the features that you're going to see in other iPaaS platforms and ESB platforms that are significantly more expensive for a comparable set of functionality. Now, I mentioned already that we have a code-free designer. I'm going to show you that. Because it's code-free, you don't have to plan everything waterfall style up front. In fact, one thing that we try to really encourage is the ability to experiment with use cases very quickly. And so you can iterate on the design of a workflow until you've got it just right. And because it's all done visually, it's very quick to make those iterations, which means that you can get to a solution design that is exactly what you want it to be at a lesser cost than if you had to do a lot of upfront planning. The other aspect to the design being visual is that as an end customer, you also have an agency and autonomy over the integration that you don't have if you're using a code-based integration platform or hand-coded solutions. I mentioned this earlier. So if you're a department head or something like that, you can sign into Flowgear and look at the solutions that have been designed for you. Again, you might not be comfortable actually making changes, but you can still view them. You can see what the data looks like. You can see what's moving through it. You can see what's processing successfully or failing. And so when you do involve your partner, you're going to be able to give them a very technically accurate briefing around what needs to get done. At the same time, much like the higher-end ESB platforms, we support complex use cases in terms of the types of data mapping. I'm going to show you a little bit of that, and also the ability to seamlessly blend cloud and on-premise. And for all intents and purposes today, on-premise doesn't usually literally mean on-premise. What it usually means is in a data center behind a firewall in its own VLAN. So you can traverse those very easily in Flowgear with the agent-based approach that we have there. And finally, our commercial model, as I mentioned, centers around active workflows. So you can build any number of integrations in the platform. Let's say you've built 100 of them, but you can control exactly which of those integrations are active at a point in time. And by controlling how many of them are active at a time, you can squeeze onto the most appropriate subscription for you. And what this does is frees you up to experiment with different use cases. You've got access to all of the connectors, so you don't have to even request a license if you want to start experimenting with a different type of integration. Over here you can see how our price plans check out. The most important thing over here is really that active workflows. So even on our base plan, you could have built 100 workflows, as we call them. Those are the integrations. And as long as you can control that only 10 of them are active at a time, you can squeeze into the base plan. If you're interested in finding out more about this, there's a lot more information on our pricing page. And there are a lot of features that get unlocked on certain plans as well. So be sure to take a look at those. Now, with respect to the components, a lot of the value of the platform is derived from the breadth of its connectors. Today, we have about 200 connectors available in the platform. Roughly 100 of those are what we refer to as product connectors. Those are going to deal with the SAPs, the Salesforces, the Sugar CRMs, the Syspros, the Sages, and so on. ERP, CRM, HR, e-commerce, the sort of common tool sets. Then the other 100 connectors are what we call technology connectors, and those allow you to deal with open standards and services. So they're generic connectors that will allow you to connect into any SQL-based database, file systems, FTP, including things like SFTP, obviously, and different APIs like REST and SOAP. So generally speaking, you're going to have all of the connectors that you need out the box. But what we also allowed you to do is build your own connectors, and you can seamlessly publish those into the platform. Your developers can actually build those and live debug them. When they're ready, they can publish them, and you can make those connectors available for your own internal use in the platform. So if you're moving from a hand-coded solution and you're taking an investment in Flowgear, then you can take the code assets that you've already built and reconfigure those into connectors so that you're not reinventing your IP. You're able to use the assets that you've spent time and money developing, but now you're able to control them and manage them from within the Flowgear platform itself. And finally, from a delivery standpoint, we run on Microsoft Azure. We run 3 locations around the world. I think we've got probably the majority of folks on the call today are based in South Africa. We are the only iPaaS vendor that has a service offering delivered locally out of South Africa. This is important from a data sovereignty point of view. We're all familiar with POPI for South Africa and then GDPR for the EU. But generally speaking, if the data and the workloads are processed in your territory, that's always a good thing. And that's what we guarantee with Flowgear. With each of these 3 public environments that you see here, we run a secondary environment in the region with a real-time data replication. We run those environments hot, and they're capable of doing a complete disaster recovery failover in under 5 minutes. And that would require that an entire data center had gone down. Obviously, we use best practice like scale out at the individual region level, but if that entire region's unavailable, there's a real-time failover occurs within about a 5-minute period. Now, the other thing that's of interest to some customers here, if you're looking at large volumes, if you're in a regulated industry, or if you're interested in becoming a Flowgear partner, you might like to look at taking out a private cloud subscription. And what this does is allows us to spin up for you a dedicated environment. It runs in the same Azure data center, generally speaking, but we can scale that to precisely the size that you require, and we can ensure that only your workload and your data is stored within that environment. As an additional on top of that, if you're already contracting with Microsoft and you have an EA or enterprise agreement with Microsoft Azure, then what we're also able to do is spin up that environment under your EA. So if you need a carve-out spend against an EA that you've pre-agreed with Microsoft, this is a really good way to be able to allocate that without incurring that additional cost from Flowgear as your vendor as well. So with that, I'm going to go into a demo. I looked at a quick look over the attendee list. It looks like we've got a good mix of developers and folks who are in non-development roles. So this is usually the place where I get a lot of questions from the developers. I would encourage you, if you're interested, if you have some questions, throw them into the Q&A. I'm going to complete the presentation, complete the demo, and then we'll just pick off whatever's in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to run through that. And if that means going back into our console, I'll be doing that as well. So we kind of got a four-way sort of integration here. I'm going to show you some basics, and then we're going to kind of ramp it up and go to a bit more of an involved workflow. I am going to cover some things at a very straightforward level. Again, if there are technical folks attending today, or if you would like your developers to be able to understand this in more detail, we can make available the workflows that I show you, and we can obviously set up one-on-one calls with you as well if you'd like more technical detail around that. But principally, here's what I'm going to show you. So we're going to integrate with Salesforce. We want to be able to pull approved orders or quotes out of Salesforce, and then we want to send those across as invoices into Sage. We're going to use Sage 200 Evolution. And then just to demonstrate one type of notification, we're going to send messages to the team via Slack to notify them that there are orders waiting to be processed. And then the fourth scenario is just the way that you could have a mobile app call into Flowgear, and Flowgear can acquire that data regardless of where that data needs to come from. Flowgear is going to take care of all of those bits for you. So I'm going to jump into the Flowgear console. Right. First thing I'm going to do is just start a new workflow. And this is what we call the design canvas, and this is where I'm going to perform all of the steps that are required to get an integration up and running. So you can see a plus button over here. This is where I would begin to add steps, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what it feels like to start working with a connector. So if I click on add over here, I can then type in the name of the connector that we want. So you can see a full list of all of those connectors available. I'm going to filter for Salesforce. And then I have a connection that I'm going to select. I've pre-configured that. And one of the things that we do inside the platform is allow you to load up a list of all of the different types of objects that you can interact with. So as you can imagine, in Salesforce, there's maybe 100 different objects in the vanilla organization. I want to be able to create a contact record. So I can go into choose sample over here, and this is going to query my live Salesforce company and get me a list of all of those potential interactions, and I'll be able to select one of those samples. So now that it's loaded up, you can see there's about 2,000 of them, and I can choose create contact, and it's going to load the structure of that request onto the design for me. So without having to go anywhere else, I can see what the example of that contact information looks like. This is my actual live Salesforce company, so if I'd had extra custom fields in here, they'd be showing up as well. And then on the right-hand side, I can see a tree view. So most integrations, you're going to pull data out from somewhere, you're going to reshape it, and then you're going to send it to where it needs to go. And that's basically the gist of the process that you're going to follow. So with that in mind, let me go through some of these integrations. So we'll start with a Salesforce to Sage Evolution, and I've got a simple example together. So here's what's happening. First of all, we're using the Salesforce connector to query for the header information for an order. Then we're getting the lines that are associated with that order. Those are two separate pieces of data that are coming back. So then we want to blend those down into a single document. That's what this merge process is doing over here. Then the fields that are in Salesforce don't match the ones in Sage. So we have to reshape the structure of that document so that Sage can accept that request. And that's what this stage is doing over here. And then over on the far right, we're sending that data over to Sage. So let me jump back a little bit, and we're just going to have a look at what those data mappings look like. So over here, on the left-hand side is my source tree view. So this is my document containing my Salesforce order header and then the detail lines. And then this kind of third column over here are the list of fields that are available inside Sage Evolution. And as you can see, I've been able to just visually map these fields across. So I can just create these connector lines, and it'll give me a real-time update on the right-hand side over here, showing me how it's reshaped that data. So a lot of the time building these integrations is going to be spent here, and you can see it's quite quite an intuitive visual process to be able to build these. Now, oftentimes you need to go beyond just mapping the fields. You actually need to manipulate those fields a little bit. So this fourth column allows you to put in functions. But before you're worried about what I mean by functions, these behave almost exactly the same as Microsoft Excel. So if you've ever used Excel, which is basically everyone, and you've run a left function to trim a field to a certain length, that's exactly what it feels like to use these functions. In fact, I'll give you a quick example of that. So let's try find a field that I could map across. Here we have just a hard-coded thing that says Salesforce quotes. And if I start typing the function name left, I could say left and then trim to 10, and that will trim it by 10 characters. And you saw that it popped out with that IntelliSense showing me the available functions and so on. I can see in the preview that it's done that trimming for me immediately. So all of that happens instantaneously, and if anything's gone wrong, I've badly named the function or something like that, it'll give me that display of that error immediately. So it's very easy to figure out what needs to change to be able to correct something. Now this doesn't just stop at string manipulation. That's a fairly common one. You might need to split strings and combine them and so on, but you can also work with numbers, so different math operations. You can work with dates and times, rewrite them. You can dynamically filter. So for example, let's say I needed to exclude certain detail lines based on the category of the stock code. You could use a filter to selectively exclude them, again, without writing any code. This key icon over here allows you to aggregate. So let's say your sales order that was coming in had multiple stock codes repeated multiple times. You could aggregate those down to a single line grouped by stock code, and then you could sum together the quantities for each unique stock code. So it's a real-time aggregation. And then finally, oftentimes when you're dealing with a master data record in the source, it's got a different key to the target. So for instance, if I'm integrating an order for a customer, maybe it's called customer 123 in Salesforce, but it's called customer ABC in Sage Evolution. Well, you can run a lookup function that behaves very much like an Excel VLOOKUP to manipulate that. So it's to switch out 123 into ABC as that data flows through. So all of that manipulation can kind of just get done from within the platform immediately. It's very easy to make those changes. So with those things in mind, let me just give it a run quickly. You can see the workflow executing, and this is what I would go through as an implementation partner executing these steps. I can look at the activity log now and see the stages that have executed. And so if I focus, for example, the get order stage, this is where we queried the order header, I can drill into the response property and have a look at what came back from Salesforce. So this table that you see over here is showing me the structure of that document that came back, and I can inspect that data as I'm debugging and troubleshooting it. All the way down at the bottom now, if I have a look at Sage Evolution, again, I've got a request that went into Sage Evolution, and then I've got a response that came out telling me whether or not it succeeded. If I drill into that, I can see over here in this gray band, this is the sales order header data. Over here on the right-hand side in the white section, that's the detail line. And then this next gray section is showing me the status or the outcome of that document, telling me in this case that it was successful, and then sending me or logging the ID of that order that just got created. So that's a simple example. You can see that basic pattern. You want to pull data out, you want to translate it, and then when you want to send it off to wherever it needs to go. Now, if we look at something a little bit more involved than that, let me just ramp it up a little bit. Here's an example that instead of just pulling one order, what it's going to do is look for orders that are ready to be processed. So this is a little bit closer to what you do in a production scenario. So it's going to get a list of orders in this first stage over here. Then it's going to step through each of those orders one at a time. So if there's 10 orders, it's going to fire 10 times. For each of those, it's going to get the detail lines against that order. And then just like we saw earlier, it's going to take the header lines and blend those into the detail lines. So it's a single document for that order. And then we go through a data mapping process again, just like we saw before. So this data map looks very similar to the one that we had earlier on. And now the data is prepared, and it's going to be posted into Sage Evolution. But now we take it a little bit further. What if we need to know whether that data succeeded in integrating or failed? We need to make that distinction. So over here on the right-hand side now, we look at whether this operation was successful. And the way that we're doing that is we're looking at a specific field. We're looking at the success field, and we're saying, does that match true? In other words, did it succeed? If it did, then we're recording metrics for that field. These are key values in Flowgear. The key would be the ID of the order that we got out of Salesforce, and the value will tell us whether it processed successfully or not. If it didn't, that'll contain an error message, and if it did, it'll contain the sales sales order number or the invoice number that got generated in Sage Evolution. So if it generated successfully, we record a success over here, and if it failed, we record an error over here. So I'll show you what that looks like. Again, similar sort of concept. We're going to run this. As it happens, I think there are actually about 10 orders, so you can see it stepping through these in real time now. And in a moment, it should have finished processing those orders. So it's completed processing. The only difference is now that when we run the Sage Evolution stage, let me just get you one over here. Over here, you can see the success stage. It's telling us this worked successfully, and then it's recording the status of that order. I'll show you where that is. So in the document that it's looking at, it's going to record the ID of the sales order or the invoice number that it just generated. We're going to see that recorded in a report, which I'll show you in a second. Now, to take this a little bit further, let's say that we wanted to actually be able to notify when those orders have been created. So what I've got on the back over here is an additional stage to send a Slack message. So I'm going to connect that in, so we're including that as part of the workflow. And what this does is just send a templated order message. So order number at value in dollars is ready to process. And we just plug that in to the process. And what I'll do now is we'll start that running, and here's my Slack instance. We should start to see some of those messages pop through. Now, you don't have to do this just with Slack, obviously. That's just one example of real-time messaging. You can completely customize this for any way that you need. Real-time messaging, you're going to be able to do things like SMS, email. Slack is a pretty popular one for us, and then WhatsApp for Business is a brand new one for us. What you can also do is if you're using a ticketing system, maybe you're using a Zendesk, an Autotask, or a ConnectWise, you can have Flowgear generate tickets directly there without going through email first. So you can have real-time notifications. Maybe you want to send a push message to your teams for success, but then you want to log a ticket if something failed to integrate. That's roughly what those steps would look like if you wanted to take that approach. Now, I showed you just now how I'd created these key values, so we're logging that, but I haven't actually shown you what we would then do with it. Well, over here on the right-hand side is a very basic report that you could use as the beginnings of a notification of activity. So what's happening here, just 3 stages really. First of all, it's querying those key values. So now it's going to look at all of the orders created over the past day and get me that summary information. What was the Salesforce ID? What was the Sage Evolution invoice number or the error message? And then it's going to translate that into an Excel spreadsheet. You could then email that, you could generate a ticket system, or you could show it in the platform in real time. But I'm just going to run this fragment of the workflow to show you what that would feel like. And I can download the report from here now. Again, this is just very basic. Normally you're going to extend this with a lot of additional information as well, but the key information that we're interested in actually is in here. So in the report that's come up, let's just expand these. We'll just zoom it in a little bit. So those keys, those are the IDs of the sales orders that we had in Salesforce, and these are the invoice numbers if it succeeded, or otherwise you're seeing a failure over there along with a timestamp. So you've got that basic information that the platform's tracking with you, and then you can augment that with more extended information if you want to as well. Now, in terms of the way that this automates, so I'm showing you how we would run this from the design environment, but obviously once this is good for prime time, you're not going to be running it from here. There's really 3 ways that you can automate. I'm going to show you the first 2 right now. The first is that an end user can run this integration on demand if they want to. So I can go allow run on demand over here. And if I open the screen that an end user would see, they're not going to obviously see the design of the workflow, but they can go to this run workflow screen, and then they'll be able to hit a run button and they'll get a report back at the end of it. So that would be on demand. If you wanted to automate it on a triggered basis, these are what we call always on workflows, you can add a trigger to the beginning of the workflow. So if I go to add and then I click on triggers, here are some of the triggers that we support. You could wait for messages to arrive on a queue, you could wait for a time of day, you could wait for an email to arrive at an inbox, you could wait for a file to be created on a server, or you could wait for a change in a database. As a simple example, I'll just use the day scheduler. So let's say I want this process to run every day, and I want it to run during office hours, and maybe I want it to run every 5 minutes. You would just inline that process just like that. So that's the way that you would automate it. So that's mode 1 is on demand. Mode 2 is triggered, as you see on screen over here. And then the third way is via API. Now, when I showed you that demo slide just now, I mentioned that we'd look at a use case where you have a mobile app, and that mobile app can request information from the company's systems without directly accessing them. So let's say you're building a customer-facing application. You want customers to be able to self-serve. Maybe they need to be able to log in, and then they want to be able to obtain their customer information, maybe update personal information, and perhaps see their current account balance, that kind of thing. Well, this is an example of what that might end up looking like. So over here, we've got a workflow that runs a query on that same Sage 200 database, but this time around it's running a query that pulls a customer piece of customer data out according to an account code, and then what it does is just maps that data a little bit. So I'll show you the quick map. I've just mapped some sort of random field, so it's not particularly involved. And over the on the right-hand side, this time around, I'm using a JSON document. So this is the data that the application wants back. You can then secure all of that with an API key, and you can bind that workflow. So over here, you'd be able to customize your domain. That would be something like your company name.flowgear.net, and you can build your own API here. When you invoke that, it's going to actually fire up that workflow. So what you're doing is you're having Flowgear act as this smart intermediary. The mobile application makes requests to Flowgear in a way that suits it. It doesn't matter what your internal systems are going to do. The mobile app can make just these really simple requests. In Flowgear, you can use things like Quick Map to manipulate that data so it exactly suits what that mobile app wants to use. And then what it's doing internally is calling into the internal systems. So in the example that I have here, we're just calling into a database, but perhaps it needed to call a database for your account information, and then maybe it needed to call into your ERP to get your credit score, and then maybe some other system to get the customer current account balance. It could take those three data sources in real time, mesh them together into a composite data set, and send that back to the mobile app. And effectively, that's what we're demonstrating here. So I just added this text over here, is just the exact URL that I'll run. If you're a developer, this is the way that you would actually invoke this. So I'm just opening it in a browser, and you can see it's executed that now, and it's come back with that data. The key thing is, if I'm building a mobile app, I don't have to worry about how I'm going to integrate into that on-premise SAP implementation, for example. All I have to do is connect directly to Flowgear. Secondly, I can decide what I want the customer record to look like, because using tools like Quick Map, I'm going to be able to manipulate the resulting structure. So this is an example of how you can get data to come out of the platform to be consumed somewhere else, like that mobile app. And you can do the same thing to send data from a mobile app or from a third-party app into Flowgear as well. So I just want to show you some basic sort of management features. As you build these workflows, it's very easy to get started with these, but what you also need to do is retain control of these integrations over time. So one of the things that we do is we have revision management, which is a way to record all of the historical versions of this integration. So you can see over here, now that I've opened the revision management pane, I'm on revision 6 of this workflow. This is very much like the way that you would manage your code if you were committing that to a repository. And you can walk back in time to see what the design of that integration looked like. So I'm going back to an earlier and earlier point in time till I've gone all the way back to the beginning. So if you do make a mistake on an integration, you can go back to an earlier version and bring that back into production. At the same time, you've always got full diagnostic visibility of everything that's happened historically inside that integration. Now, the other thing that we deal with for you is allow you to target multiple different environments. You may have noticed that this button at the top says production, and the reason that it says that is because you can customize multiple environments in the platform. So if I drill into the connection that I have for my Sage Evolution integration, it's running on a server called Flowgear Lab, and I have an environment called production, which is the one that's focused right now. Let's say that was my production server. If I click the test tab, I can fill out a completely different set of details over here. So I can provide completely different endpoints that I want to run with in test. When I'm busy designing the workflow now, all I do is switch to test mode and run it from there. And then eventually, when I'm ready, I can switch over to production. So there's no manually having to build things and put them into different environments. And this means that you can't make mistakes because there is no deployment process. You can't break something accidentally as part of the chain. Now, the last thing that we have is a feature called release management that allows you to control when certain versions get into production. So on bigger integrations, or if you're working with a bigger team, that's something that you'd want to enable. I'm just going to turn that on quickly, and then I'll just refresh the screen. And now with release management on, it defaults me to the test environment, and I can do all of my testing over here. When I'm ready, I can now decide to promote that version into production. So I made a change to the workflow. I've now got revision 7 running in test. When I'm ready, I can promote that into my user acceptance testing environment. I can have the QA folks sign off on that, and then when they're ready, they will promote that into production. And so this will allow you to slipstream updates to the integrations into production without disrupting things that are already working. So if you're working on a new version of an existing workflow, you don't even have to copy that workflow. You just continue working on it, and when you're ready, you can have a structured way to test those changes and then slipstream them immediately into production. So there are many other there are many other features that I haven't really covered in a lot of detail. I'd be very happy to discuss those, or our team would be very happy to go through those with you if you want to understand more of the sort of technical features that we have available. So if you're an end customer here today, maybe you've got some things at kind of ideation stage, you want to explore those, or maybe you have some well-defined integration requirements. We'd love for you to work with one of our channel partners. I'll pull those logos up again just now. Many of the sponsors that you see today are actually channel partners, and you can view our partners and reach out to them directly from our website as well. All of these partners have been on an intensive technical certification course, and many of them bring domain expertise in other areas. For example, we have certain partners that work with particular CRM tools, others that work with particular ERPs, others with particular e-commerce platforms. So if you have a particular requirement, we'll match you up based on those expertise. Much of it you can actually see on the website as well. And if you need help with those areas, let's say you've got an SAP implementation and you want to run integration around that, we'll point you to a partner who'd be able to assist you with that. On the other side of that, if you are interested in becoming a partner, we do have a full partner program available as well. This is the kind of high level on it. I'd encourage you to go over to /partner-program for more information there. Really, what this is going to allow you to do is complement your existing business by delivering integration solutions to your existing customers. What that allows you to do is have a single platform that will meet all of the integration requirements for them. As we've seen, we have very competitive pricing in terms of the subscriptions that we make available, but we have annuity revenue available to you as a partner for that as well. And you're also able to generate revenue from professional services. So as you build and maintain these integrations, that's professional services work that you're able to build to your customer. And all of these things are going to enhance the footprint that you have within your customer. You'll have a greater proverbial share of wallet, and it means that you'll become that trusted provider because you're able to not just sell the CRM that you kind of led with, but you're now able to offer integration around not just that, but all of the other systems that the company uses internally as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much. It's been great. We've had some really good attendance here. Again, take a look at the list of partners. Very thankful for the sponsors who've helped us to put this together. If you're interested in working with these partners, feel free to reach out to us directly. Otherwise, you're welcome to take a look directly on our website. And you can also get a free trial of the platform at Free Trial POC. So feel free to do that. Well, it's been my pleasure to walk you through this. As I mentioned, you do have access to a trial account. We give you a 30-day trial. If you'd like to engage with us, whether you've got requirements that you want to build out yourself, or if you'd like to work through one of our partners, we'd be happy to put you in touch with them. And if you do have any other questions around capabilities and fit and connectors and that type of thing, then we'd love to hear from you. So with that, thank you and cheers.